The night Sonny Franzese Sr. was born, Brooklyn didn't know his name, but it already knew the kind of boy he would become. The neighborhood breathed differently after dark. Storefront lights dimmed, conversations dropped to half-whispers, and people learned early that survival wasn't about being the loudest voice on the block. It was about knowing who to listen to, who to avoid, and when to keep your eyes forward and your mouth shut. Sonny grew up absorbing those lessons the way other kids absorbed bedtime stories. He was raised in a world where respect wasn't something you asked for, it was something you earned or lost. There was no middle ground. Men remembered slights the way other people remembered birthdays, and favors traveled faster than rumors. Sonny watched it all quietly, learning that power didn't always wear a uniform or carry a title. Sometimes it wore a calm face and spoke softly. As a boy, Sonny wasn't reckless. He wasn't wild. He was observant. He noticed which men were greeted warmly and which were greeted carefully. He noticed how certain conversations stopped when certain people entered a room. And he noticed that the most influential men rarely raised their voices. They didn't need to. Silence did the work for them. That silence fascinated him. Sonny grew tall, strong, and confident early on. People noticed his presence before he spoke. He had the kind of physical confidence that made others stand a little straighter, but what really set him apart was his patience. He could wait. He could listen. He didn't rush to prove himself. That made older men comfortable around him. In neighborhoods like his, comfort was dangerous, but it was also currency. As Sonny entered his teens, the streets tested him the way they test everyone. He learned quickly what consequences looked like, how quickly a situation could change if someone misread a moment. But he also learned something else. Loyalty mattered. If you stood your ground for the right people remembered. Sonny didn't chase trouble. Trouble seemed to notice him anyway. By the time he was a young man, his name started traveling, quietly, respectfully. Not as a loud headline, not as a bragging story, but as a solid presence. Someone dependable, someone who didn't panic, someone who handled himself without drama. That kind of reputation spreads slowly, but it spreads far. Sonny found himself drawn into circles where conversations were careful and decisions were deliberate. He didn't interrupt. He didn't boast. He listened, filed things away, and waited. When he did speak, it was measured. People noticed that too. He understood something early that many never learned. In his world, attention was both a reward and a risk. The more attention you attracted, the shorter your lifespan tended to be, socially or otherwise. Sonny preferred longevity over excitement, and yet he wasn't invisible. There was something about him, an intensity behind calm eyes, that made people pay attention without him asking. He carried himself like someone who expected respect, and most people gave it to him instinctively. As the years passed, Sonny's world expanded. The neighborhoods blended into a larger network of relationships, obligations, and expectations. Each connection came with its own unspoken rules. Sonny didn't try to bend those rules. He mastered them. He learned who to trust with information and who to trust only with silence. He learned that promises were currency and that breaking them cost more than money. And he learned that the strongest men weren't always the ones who acted first, but the ones who acted last, after everyone else revealed their intentions. There were moments when Sonny could have chased attention, could have stepped into the spotlight earlier. But he didn't. He chose steadiness. He chose patience. He chose to be underestimated. And in doing so, he built something far more powerful than notoriety. By the time Sonny, Franzese became a name spoken carefully by men who knew the rules, he had already decided the kind of man he would be. Not loud, not reckless, not desperate for recognition. He would be remembered because he endured. And as Brooklyn continued its restless rhythm, day blending into night, deals whispered and decisions weighed, Sonny stepped deeper into a life that would test every ounce of his restraint, loyalty, and discipline. This was only the beginning. Sonny Franzese learned early that momentum is dangerous if you don't know how to steer it. As his name began to travel beyond the blocks he grew up on, people started treating him differently. Not openly, not dramatically, but in small, telling ways. Conversations paused when he approached. Doors opened a little faster. Questions were phrased more carefully. Sonny noticed all of it and reacted the same way he always had, by staying calm. Calm, he understood, made people uneasy in a good way. In a world full of men eager to announce themselves, calm felt like confidence without vanity. It suggested control, and control, even implied, carried weight. Sonny was drawn deeper into circles where decisions weren't shouted or rushed. These were rooms where men spoke in measured tones and let silence do the heavy lifting. Sonny didn't try to dominate those rooms. He didn't need to. He listened, nodded, and learned who spoke for effect and who spoke because they were expected to. He paid close attention to patterns. Who spoke first? Who spoke last? Who never spoke at all but still seemed to influence the outcome? That last type fascinated Sonny. Those men didn't posture. They didn't brag. They treated influence like a utility, something you used sparingly and only when necessary. Sonny understood instinctively that this was the level worth reaching, and he was willing to wait as long as it took. Patience was his edge. As opportunities came his way, Sonny chose carefully. He didn't chase everything. He didn't overextend. He preferred situations where expectations were clear and loyalty mattered more than flash. People began to associate him with reliability. If Sonny gave his word, it meant something. If Sonny took on responsibility, things ran smoothly. That reputation mattered more than any public display ever could. But reputation also brought pressure. People began testing him, not aggressively, not openly, but subtly. Small challenges, quiet probes, moments designed to see how he reacted when things didn't go perfectly. Sonny passed those tests the same way every time, without emotion. When someone tried to rush him, he slowed down. When someone tried to impress him, he remained unimpressed. When someone tried to provoke him, he didn't take the bait. That steadiness frustrated some people. Others respected it deeply. Sonny's physical presence added to the effect. He was strong, athletic, and carried himself like someone comfortable in his own skin. But unlike others who relied on size or toughness, Sonny rarely leaned on it. He understood that strength spoken too loudly loses value. Strength held in reserve makes people think twice. As his responsibilities increased, Sonny found himself navigating more complex relationships. These weren't just street-level concerns anymore. These were conversations about logistics, trust, long-term planning, about keeping things orderly in a city that thrived on chaos. Sonny didn't pretend to know everything. He asked questions, quiet ones. He absorbed information like a sponge and rarely repeated it. He knew that information was power, but only if handled carefully. There were moments when he saw others stumble. Men who rushed forward too quickly, who spoke out of turn, who let ego guide their decisions. Sonny watched those moments closely, filing them away as lessons. He didn't judge them harshly. He simply noted the outcome, and the outcome was almost always the same. Too much attention, too fast, led to problems. Sonny wasn't interested in problems. He wanted stability. Outside of his work, Sonny maintained a disciplined routine. He stayed in excellent physical shape, not for show, but for control. Control of his body mirrored control of his emotions. He believed that if you let one slip, the other followed. He also understood the importance of balance. He didn't isolate himself completely. He valued familiar faces, routine gatherings, moments that felt normal. Normality was grounding. It reminded him why discipline mattered in the first place. But even in relaxed moments, Sonny stayed aware. He never forgot where he was or who was watching. He didn't live in fear-clouded judgment, but he lived with awareness. Awareness sharpened it. As time passed, Sonny's name began to be mentioned alongside respect rather than curiosity. People stopped asking, "Who's that?" and started saying, "He's solid." In his world, that was high praise. He didn't celebrate it. He didn't change his behavior. He treated it as confirmation that his approach worked. Still, with respect came expectation. People began looking to Sonny for guidance, not loudly, not formally, but subtly. A glance during a discussion, a pause waiting for his reaction, a question framed as a suggestion. Sonny handled those moments carefully. He never rushed to assert authority. He offered input when it mattered and stayed silent when it didn't. He wanted people to trust his judgment, not depend on his presence. That distinction mattered to him. One evening, after a long day of conversations and decisions, Sonny sat alone for a moment, reflecting. The city outside was alive, restless as ever. He understood now that this restlessness was both opportunity and threat. Navigating it required patience, discipline, and the ability to stay grounded when others lost their footing. Sonny wasn't chasing a title. He wasn't chasing recognition. He was building something quieter and stronger, a reputation rooted in restraint, reliability, and control. And as the city continued to test him, Sonny Franzese remained exactly what he had always been: calm, watchful, and prepared to move only when the moment truly mattered. By the time Sonny realized people were no longer watching him to see what he'd do next, but waiting for him to do it, something fundamental had shifted. Expectation is heavier than curiosity. Curiosity gives you room to make mistakes. Expectation assumes you already know the right answer. Sonny felt that weight most in quiet rooms. Rooms where decisions were made without votes, without raised voices, without anyone officially being in charge. He learned that power didn't announce itself. It leaned back and listened. And lately, when conversations slowed, eyes drifted toward him. Not demanding, just checking. Sonny never filled silence just to fill it. He let it stretch. Silence, he'd learned, made people reveal themselves. Some rushed to talk. Others fidgeted. A few grew uncomfortable. And a rare handful stayed calm. Those were the people Sonny remembered. His days became layered. Surface routines and deeper responsibilities intertwined so tightly they felt like one life. He still showed up where he was expected, still kept his habits steady. But beneath that steadiness ran constant calculation. Not paranoia, he hated that word, but awareness sharpened by experience. He began thinking further ahead than most. Not tomorrow, not next week. Years. What lasts? What collapses? What systems survive personalities? Sonny saw how quickly loyalty could fade when built on excitement instead of respect. He watched men chase quick wins only to spend years untangling the consequences. Sonny wanted none of that. He preferred slow growth, the kind that didn't draw attention but couldn't be ignored once established. People began trusting him with sensitive matters, not because he demanded it, but because he never misused it. He didn't repeat things unnecessarily. He didn't embellish. He didn't turn private knowledge into leverage unless stability required it. That restraint earned him something rare: confidence without fear. Even those who didn't like him respected him. Even those who competed with him accounted for him. That kind of presence changes the atmosphere. Plans adjust. Conversations shift. Paths reroute subtly. Sonny noticed those adjustments and filed them away, not with pride, but with responsibility. With influence came pressure to prove it. There were moments when others pushed for more dramatic responses, louder statements, faster action. Sonny resisted that pull. He understood that once you start performing authority, you invite challenges to it. Real authority doesn't need rehearsal. Instead, he focused on alignment. He made sure people understood expectations without spelling them out. He ensured systems ran smoothly even when he wasn't directly involved. If something worked well, he let others take visible credit. If something faltered, he stepped in quietly and fixed it. Over time, people stopped asking if Sonny would handle things. They assumed he already had. Outside of those circles, life continued at its usual pace. The city buzzed. Seasons changed. Familiar streets aged alongside the people who walked them. Sonny appreciated those ordinary rhythms more than most. They reminded him of the cost of instability. He saw how quickly disorder crept in when discipline slipped. So he held himself to standards that rarely wavered. Early mornings, physical training, clean routines, clear boundaries. If chaos existed elsewhere, it didn't live in him. That inner order became his anchor. Still, there were moments, quiet ones, usually late at night, when Sonny felt the weight of the path he was on. Influence is isolating in ways ambition never prepares you for. You can't share everything. You can't trust everyone. You learn to measure words the way others measure money. Sonny didn't resent it. He accepted. Acceptance, he believed, was the difference between those who burned out and those who endured. He began mentoring younger men, not directly, not formally, but through example. He corrected mistakes without humiliation. He rewarded patience more than aggression. He discouraged unnecessary displays of toughness. Strength, he taught, should feel effortless, not advertised. Some listened, some didn't. Sonny knew who would last. As his role solidified, so did his understanding of legacy. Not legacy as fame or stories told loudly, but as structure. The invisible framework that keeps things steady long after names fade. That was what Sonny wanted. Not applause, continuity. One evening, after a long stretch of responsibility that felt heavier than usual, Sonny walked alone through familiar streets. The city lights reflected off windows and wet pavement, blurring everything into motion. He paused for a moment, breathing it in. The city had shaped him, tested him, hardened and refined him all at once. And now, in its own subtle way, it leaned on him. Sonny adjusted his coat, squared his shoulders, and kept walking. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt prepared, because he understood something many never did. Power doesn't arrive with a sound. It arrives when everything goes quiet, and the room waits to see if you'll speak. And Sonny Franzese had learned exactly when to do that, and when not to. By the time Sonny realized that stability had become his signature, he also understood the danger of it. Stability attracts reliance. Reliance attracts pressure. And pressure, if mishandled, turns into mistakes. Sonny adjusted by becoming even more deliberate. He stopped reacting to events as they happened and started shaping the conditions around them. Not through force or noise, but through timing. Through choosing when to be present and when to step back. Through letting situations resolve themselves just enough that people learned how to handle things without constant direction. That was leadership in his mind, not control but calibration. He noticed how often people confused urgency with importance. A small problem made loud could distract from a larger issue growing quietly in the background. Sonny trained himself to ignore the noise and focus on patterns. Repeated behavior mattered more than dramatic moments. Consistency told the real story. As his influence widened, Sonny also learned the value of appearing predictable while thinking several steps ahead. Predictability made people comfortable. Comfort lowered defenses. And lowered defenses made honesty more likely. He never betrayed that honesty. That was the line he refused to cross. If someone trusted him with a concern, Sonny treated it with care. Not sentimentality, he wasn't naive, but respect. Trust, once broken, never returned in the same form. He had seen enough examples of that to know better. There were days when the responsibility weighed heavier than usual. When he felt the unspoken expectation that he would have the answer, the solution, the calming word. On those days, Sonny leaned on routine. He trained harder. He spoke less. He observed more. Physical discipline kept his mind clear. Clear thinking kept everything else intact. He also learned when to let others struggle a little. Growth, he believed, came from friction, not chaos, but challenge. If he solved every problem immediately, people would stop thinking for themselves. So sometimes he allowed discomfort, knowing it would sharpen judgment in the long run. Not everyone appreciated that approach. Some mistook restraint for distance. Others mistook patience for hesitation. Sonny didn't correct them. He understood that misinterpretation could be useful. Underestimating him gave him room to maneuver, and maneuvering quietly was his specialty. Over time, Sonny developed a reputation for seeing things early. Problems that surprised others rarely surprised him. He paid attention to small shifts, changes in tone, in behavior, in timing. Those details spoke louder than words. He kept his personal life guarded but not closed. Family mattered deeply to him, grounding him in something that existed beyond responsibility and reputation. In those moments, he allowed himself to be human rather than strategic. Laughter, shared meals, ordinary conversations. These were not distractions. They were fuel. They reminded him why he valued order in the first place. As years passed, Sonny noticed a subtle change in himself. He was calmer than before, but also heavier. Not burdened exactly, more aware. Awareness accumulates. Every decision leaves a residue. Every choice adds weight. He accepted that weight as part of the role. There were moments when he could have expanded faster, pushed harder, demanded more. He chose not to. Speed created instability. He preferred endurance. He wanted something that would last longer than any one moment. People around him aged, shifted, moved on. New faces appeared, eager and impatient. Sonny watched them with interest, not judgment. He remembered being young, remembered the temptation to rush forward. He didn't stop them. Time would teach what he couldn't. One night, long after most of the city had quieted, Sonny sat alone, thinking about how far he'd come without ever truly announcing it. There was no single turning point he could point to, no dramatic rise. Just a series of careful decisions stacked patiently on top of one another. That realization gave him a strange sense of peace. He hadn't built his life on spectacle. He had built it on balance. And balance, he knew, was rare in a world that constantly leaned too far in one direction or another. As dawn approached, Sonny stood, adjusted his jacket, and prepared to step back into the rhythm of the day. Whatever challenges waited, he would meet them the same way he always had, quietly, thoughtfully, and without unnecessary motion. Because Sonny Franzese understood. Something simple but powerful. If you want to last, you don't race the world. You let it move around you. The first thing Sonny noticed as time pressed forward was how easily people mistook longevity for comfort. They assumed that because he had endured, he must be relaxed. That because he had survived pressure before, future pressure would bother him less. In truth, it bothered him more because now he understood how fragile balance really was. Every system, no matter how carefully built, depended on people remembering why it existed. Sonny spent much of his energy reminding them without lecturing. He did it through example, through consistency, through refusing shortcuts that promised quick gains but weakened foundations. He had learned that the most dangerous moments weren't crises, they were periods of success. Success made people careless. Careless people invited instability. So Sonny stayed alert. His days were full, but rarely frantic. He organized his time the way he organized everything else, with intention. Meetings were brief. Conversations were precise. He didn't linger where he wasn't needed, and he didn't rush where patience would do more work than urgency. People began to mirror his pace without realizing it. Rooms slowed down when he entered. Discussions became more thoughtful. Emotional reactions softened. Sonny didn't demand that effect, it followed him naturally, like gravity. But gravity also attracts weight. As new pressures emerged, Sonny faced choices that tested not his resolve, but his restraint. There were opportunities that promised expansion, influence, visibility. Each one came with a cost. More exposure, more unpredictability, more risk of being misunderstood. He declined most of them quietly. Those decisions confused some and frustrated others. A few mistook his caution for fear. Sonny didn't correct them. Fear, after all, was not the worst thing people could assume. Underestimation had its advantages. What mattered to him was cohesion. He paid attention to how people worked together, not just how they performed individually. Talent without alignment created friction. Ambition without discipline created fractures. Sonny focused on reducing those fractures before they became visible. He understood that once cracks showed, repair became 10 times harder. In private moments, Sonny reflected on how different his life looked from the outside versus how it felt on the inside. Outsiders might have imagined tension, conflict, constant maneuvering. In reality, much of his life was quiet, thoughtful, repetitive in the best way. Routine wasn't boring to him, it was protective. Morning training, familiar streets, known faces, predictable rhythms. These things gave his mind space to process complexity without being overwhelmed by it. Still, the weight of responsibility followed him everywhere. Even in moments of rest, part of his mind stayed alert. Not anxious, alert. He had learned the difference. Anxiety scattered attention. Alertness focused it. Sonny cultivated the latter. He also learned the importance of stepping back at the right time. Not disappearing, not abandoning responsibility, but allowing others to step forward. Growth required trust, and trust required letting go of control in measured ways. That was harder than it sounded. Letting go meant accepting that others would do things differently. Not worse, just differently. Sonny had to remind himself that systems couldn't depend solely on his preferences. They had to adapt, evolve, remain flexible. So he watched. He listened. He intervened only when necessary. Those choices weren't always popular. Some wanted clearer direction, firmer guidance, stronger presence. Sonny understood the desire, but he resisted it. He believed that resilience came from shared understanding, not centralized command. That belief shaped everything he did. As years accumulated, Sonny's perspective widened. He thought less about individual moments and more about arcs, how things unfolded over time. He saw cycles repeat themselves. Enthusiasm, overconfidence, correction, renewal. Recognizing those patterns helped him stay grounded when others panicked. He didn't chase reassurance. He trusted preparation. One evening, after a long stretch of decisions that felt heavier than usual, Sonny found himself alone with his thoughts. The city outside his window glowed softly, indifferent to individual struggles. That indifference comforted him. It reminded him that no one person was the center of everything, and that was okay. He thought about the younger version of himself, the ambition, the energy, the impatience. He didn't regret it. That fire had been necessary, but he was grateful it had tempered into something steadier. Control without ego, strength without display, influence without noise. Those qualities didn't make headlines. They didn't inspire stories told loudly, but they built something durable. And durability, Sonny believed, was the truest measure of success. As he prepared for rest, Sonny felt neither pride nor regret, just acceptance. He had chosen his path carefully, step by step. He had resisted the urge to rush, to prove, to perform. Tomorrow would bring new conversations, new decisions, new pressures. He would meet them the same way he always did. Calm, measured, present. Because Sonny Franzese had learned a truth that only time teaches. The loudest moves fade fastest. The quiet ones shape the future. Sonny Franzese understood that influence, like water, takes the shape of its container. The wider the reach, the more careful the flow had to be. By this stage in his life, his reach had stretched far beyond the streets he had grown up on. He operated in networks that spanned neighborhoods, boroughs, even cities. The decisions he made, or sometimes the decisions he chose not to make, rippled further than most people realized. And with every ripple came responsibility, though not always the kind that appeared on a ledger. Some were subtle, invisible, yet no less powerful. He paid attention to those invisible forces more than anything. The way a glance at the wrong moment could spark an argument. The way a joke misinterpreted could undermine months of work. The way ambition, unchecked, could topple structures that had taken years to stabilize. Sonny's approach was quiet, but deliberate. He sought alignment before action. He sought understanding before influence. And he sought discipline before authority. By now, younger men had started gravitating toward him, not just out of respect, but because they recognized in him a blueprint for endurance. Many were eager for quick wins, for instant recognition, for dramatic moments. Sonny did not grant these easily. Instead, he rewarded patience, restraint, and careful observation. Those who listened and learned became valuable allies. Those who sought attention and shortcuts learned, often too late, the value of subtlety. Sonny never humiliated anyone. He never shouted. He simply demonstrated, quietly, that longevity and patience were more powerful than flash. The lessons weren't limited to professional dealings. Sonny's personal life, carefully balanced, mirrored his philosophy. Family, friendships, routine, they were his anchor. In his household, he applied the same principles. Consistency, respect, attentiveness. He was firm when necessary, lenient when it promoted growth, and always aware that influence extended beyond business or reputation. He wanted to nurture people, not dominate them. Guidance, he believed, worked best when it was invisible, like the roots of a tree that hold firm even when the wind bends the branches. Even as his influence solidified, Sonny never lost his awareness of unpredictability. The city was alive and restless, full of movement, change, and unanticipated developments. He had seen countless examples of how quickly things could spiral out of control when a single misstep occurred. That is why he never relied solely on memory or instinct. Systems, routines, and rules, subtle but rigid, were his tools. They allowed him to steer complex networks with minimal disturbance. He valued structure over spontaneity, stability over spectacle, and foresight over reaction. Yet Sonny was not inflexible. He recognized the importance of adaptation. Circumstances changed, people evolved, and unexpected events occurred. What mattered was not resisting change outright, but channeling it wisely. He had learned to read subtle cues. A hesitation, a choice of words, a shift in tone. These were the early warnings, the tremors before larger events. Acting too quickly, reacting without observation, or allowing emotion to guide decisions. Those were the mistakes that cost careers, reputations, and sometimes lives. Sonny moved deliberately to avoid them. As he aged, the lessons he had accumulated became sharper, more distilled. He no longer needed to test everyone. He could sense character, reliability, and intention quickly. And that ability was powerful, not because it allowed him to dominate, but because it allowed him to prevent unnecessary problems. Prevention, Sonny believed, was the ultimate form of influence. Solve nothing after it becomes a problem. Prevent the problem before it arises. That approach required constant vigilance, but vigilance became second nature over decades of experience. He also understood the necessity of reputation. Not a reputation built on spectacle, but one built on consistency, reliability, and integrity within his circles. Words mattered, but actions mattered more. Trust was both currency and shield. People who respected him did so not out of fear, but because they recognized his fairness, his discipline, and his clarity of thought. They trusted that he would act in ways that preserved stability, even when he chose to remain silent. Silence, in Sonny's philosophy, was a form of guidance, subtle, unyielding, and instructive. Mentorship became an important facet of his later years. Young men came to him seeking guidance, eager to prove themselves, often impatient with the slow, quiet lessons Sonny valued. He met them with patience, often teaching indirectly through observation, example, and controlled responsibility. A task assigned, a subtle correction, a brief discussion, these were his tools. He preferred results over explanations, showing over telling. The most important lesson, however, was always implicit. Enduring influence comes from consistency, patience, and careful restraint, not from flash, bravado, or immediate recognition. There were rare moments of reflection, moments where he allowed himself to consider the span of his life. The streets of Brooklyn, the networks of relationships, the quiet decisions that had kept him alive and respected, they all formed a mosaic of experience. He didn't dwell on regrets or victories. He focused on patterns, outcomes, and the lessons they provided. Each choice had consequences, some subtle, some profound, but all valuable. Life, Sonny understood, was a sequence of interconnected events where foresight and patience outweighed ambition and recklessness. Even in solitude, Sonny maintained his principles. He exercised, maintained discipline, and observed the world around him. The rhythm of daily life became both a comfort and a strategic advantage, kept him sharp, prepared, and in control. By valuing routine and structure, he ensured that his mind remained clear, his judgment sound, and his influence consistent. Routine was not monotony. It was armor. Sonny also understood the importance of humility. He never allowed recognition to dictate his actions. Attention, when received, was treated as a temporary phenomenon. Endurance, reliability, and foresight, these were permanent qualities. He measured success not by visibility, but by the stability he maintained and the respect he commanded quietly. The city moved fast, but Sonny moved deliberately, understanding that the real power lay in consistency, not spectacle. Over decades, Sonny's approach created a network of men who acted with awareness, discipline, and patience. They mirrored his methods, absorbed his subtle lessons, and internalized the value of quiet, deliberate action. Those who ignored the lessons faced the consequences of their impulsiveness, while those who absorbed them prospered in ways that were rarely visible to outsiders. Influence, he knew, was most potent when it was subtle, persistent, and unrecognized. As the years passed, Sonny Franzese began to consider legacy, not the flashy stories told by outsiders, but the structural continuity he left behind. Systems, behaviors, and principles were more enduring than fame. He wanted endurance, not applause; stability, not spectacle; influence, not attention. The real measure of a life well lived, he concluded, was the capacity to shape outcomes silently, decisively, and sustainably. At the close of the day, Sonny often sat quietly, reflecting on the balance he had achieved. His body aged, but his mind remained sharp. The city hummed beyond the walls of his home, indifferent, restless, alive. He had learned to navigate its complexities without being consumed by them. The lessons of patience, observation, and disciplined action had carried him through challenges that would have overwhelmed others, and they had prepared him for the final phases of life with the same quiet confidence he had carried for decades. He knew the future would bring new actors, new situations, and unforeseen challenges, but he also knew that the principles he had instilled in himself and in those who had learned from him would persist. Those principles were invisible yet powerful, subtle yet enduring. They were the true legacy of Sonny Franzese. Not stories shouted, not headlines written, not names remembered, but a framework of understanding, restraint, and influence that shaped outcomes far beyond what the eye could see. Sonny had become a master of the quiet, a master of patience, a master of enduring influence, and in the silent moments of reflection, he recognized that this mastery, earned over decades of careful observation, disciplined action, and strategic restraint, was more meaningful than any fleeting recognition. The city moved on, people came and went, and life continued. But the structures Sonny built, the lessons he lived, and the influence he exercised quietly remained, like a current beneath the surface, steady, enduring, and invisible. As Sonny Franzese moved into the later decades of his life, he became increasingly aware of how fragile influence could be if not maintained with care. Longevity had given him a vantage point few could claim, a view of the patterns that governed behavior, the subtle signals that indicated loyalty or misstep, the small indicators that hinted at the emergence of problems before they fully surfaced. He understood that influence was cumulative. Every choice, every word, every silent pause contributed to a larger pattern, a web of understanding that held people and situations in place. Missteps weren't always catastrophic, but they had a way of cascading when uncorrected, creating instability that could take years to undo. Sonny had seen it happen countless times, and he knew how to prevent it because he had learned to act before problems became visible. He had developed an almost instinctual sense for assessing people, not just their skills or strength, but their reliability, patience, and capacity for restraint. He could tell when someone acted for attention versus when they acted with genuine purpose. These assessments were rarely spoken aloud. They were observed, cataloged, and used to guide his interactions. This wasn't manipulation, it was strategy, but a subtle one, rooted in the idea that the most enduring influence isn't forced, it's earned and maintained quietly. Sonny's approach to relationships reflected this philosophy. He valued consistency over spectacle, reliability over charm, and understanding over impulsive reaction. He never demanded loyalty. He allowed it to develop naturally through respect earned by patience, integrity, and calm decisiveness. Those who sought shortcuts or immediate recognition were often disappointed, but those who observed and absorbed his example thrived. This method ensured that his influence was not only long-lasting but also resilient, capable of enduring changes in circumstance, personnel, or environment. Even as his responsibilities evolved, Sonny maintained a disciplined approach to life. His routines were more than habits. They were stabilizing forces that reinforced his clarity of thought and decisiveness. Physical training, careful observation, methodical planning, and measured interactions all contributed to his ability to navigate complex social and professional networks. He understood that a strong mind depended on a strong body and that preparedness extended beyond immediate challenges to encompass long-term endurance. One of Sonny's most important principles was discretion. He understood that information, once released, could create consequences far beyond intention. He handled knowledge as a resource to be used with precision and only when necessary. Speaking too freely invited misunderstandings. Acting without careful consideration created vulnerabilities. Sonny's discipline in this regard was as much about survival as it was about influence. Over the years, he had learned that silence often spoke louder than words, that restraint could command respect, and that patience was a far more powerful tool than immediate action. Mentorship became increasingly central to Sonny's life. Young men sought guidance from him, drawn by the quiet authority he exuded. He approached these opportunities with the same measured strategy he applied to all aspects of life. Lessons were imparted through subtle example, controlled responsibilities, and carefully chosen words. Sonny taught that patience, restraint, and strategic observation were more valuable than speed or flash. He emphasized the importance of long-term thinking, careful assessment of risks, and the cultivation of stability over attention-seeking behavior. Those who absorbed his methods learned not only how to survive but also how to thrive quietly, building their own enduring influence. Sonny's perspective on power was nuanced. He recognized that influence did not require visible action, that leadership was not always about decisions made in the spotlight. True authority, in his view, was exercised quietly, consistently, and without ego. He had learned that the most enduring systems were those that operated smoothly without constant oversight, and the most respected leaders were those who facilitated stability without demanding recognition. This approach allowed him to maintain control while avoiding unnecessary attention or risk. He also maintained a keen awareness of change. The world around him evolved, people shifted, and circumstances transformed. Sonny adapted by observing patterns and anticipating consequences rather than reacting impulsively. He understood that rigidity could be as dangerous as recklessness. Flexibility, when combined with consistent principles, allowed him to navigate uncertainty while maintaining influence. This ability to adapt quietly without drama became one of his most potent strengths. Sonny's personal life mirrored these principles. Family, friendships, and routine provided grounding and perspective. He valued stability and consistency in his personal sphere as much as in his professional one. Relationships were nurtured through attentiveness, reliability, and calm guidance. He understood that the influence he wielded in the broader world was most effective when supported by a strong, balanced personal foundation. In private moments, he allowed himself reflection and relaxation, but never disengaged. Completely, awareness remained constant, a steady companion alongside experience. Even as he aged, Sonny's approach to challenges remained consistent. He focused on prevention rather than reaction, subtle guidance rather than overt control, and endurance rather than immediate gratification. Decisions were measured, communication deliberate, and observation continuous. His presence influenced outcomes more than his direct actions, and his judgment was valued because it was proven over decades of experience. He cultivated loyalty not through fear, but through trust, respect, and example. This created a network of individuals and systems capable of operating effectively even in his absence. Sonny also understood the psychological dimension of influence. He recognized that perception shaped behavior, that confidence inspired confidence, and that calm under pressure encouraged stability. By managing his own demeanor, he subtly shaped the environment around him. Patience, restraint, and careful action became his tools, more powerful than any display of force or authority. He taught these lessons implicitly, demonstrating the value of controlled influence rather than preaching it explicitly. As he reflected on his life, Sonny recognized that endurance was the ultimate measure of success. Flashy victories, dramatic confrontations, and public recognition were transient. The true test of leadership, influence, and character was longevity. How well one maintained principles, guided others, and shaped outcomes quietly over time. He had learned this lesson through decades of careful observation, disciplined action, and strategic patience. Sonny's legacy was built on invisible architecture, relationships, principles, and routines that ensured stability and continuity. These structures outlasted individual events, personalities, and crises. They were subtle, yet powerful, quiet, yet enduring. He understood that his influence would persist not because of stories told or attention garnered, but because the systems he reinforced, the lessons he imparted, and the respect he commanded continued to operate long after any single moment had passed. Even in solitude, Sonny remained vigilant. He maintained his routines, observed the world, and considered long-term consequences. The city moved around him, bustling, unpredictable, and full of energy, but he navigated it with the calm assurance of someone who had spent a lifetime understanding patterns, risks, and opportunities. Awareness, patience, and deliberate action had become second nature, ensuring that he remained in control without exerting unnecessary effort. Through decades of disciplined living, measured decision-making, and strategic mentorship, Sonny Franzese cultivated a level of influence that was rare and enduring. He taught, through example, the value of patience over impulse, observation over reaction, and endurance over spectacle. Those who observed him learned that true power is quiet, subtle, and sustainable. And in that quiet mastery lay the essence of his legacy. Sonny's life, viewed superficially, might appear to outsiders as a series of routine choices, steady interactions, and disciplined habits. But beneath the surface lay a lifetime of strategic thinking, careful observation, and deliberate action. Each decision, each interaction, each moment of restraint contributed to a broader system of influence, one capable of lasting well beyond his direct presence. This invisible structure, built with patience and precision, became the hallmark of Sonny Franzese's enduring impact. He had discovered that the most powerful way to shape the world was not through noise or confrontation, but through quiet authority, thoughtful guidance, and unyielding patience. This approach allowed him to maintain stability, foster loyalty, and ensure continuity, even in the face of constant change. By the time he reached the later stages of his life, Sonny's influence was felt everywhere, though rarely noticed. It was subtle, pervasive, and deeply rooted in the principles he had lived by for decades. As Sonny Franzese moved further into the later chapters of his life, he became increasingly aware that true influence is not a product of visibility but of subtlety. It's the kind of presence that affects outcomes quietly, without fanfare, without spectacle, without overt assertion. He had seen far too many people mistake noise for power, flash for authority, and popularity for lasting impact. Sonny had learned that the most enduring influence comes not from making headlines or commanding attention, but from creating a network of stability, respect, and trust that operates almost invisibly, like the roots of a great tree. He observed how people around him navigated their own ambitions. Some chased recognition, others sought approval, and many acted impulsively, mistaking speed for wisdom. Sonny approached each of these behaviors with patience. He didn't interfere unless necessary. Instead, he allowed patterns to reveal themselves, using observation as his guide. Those who learned to act deliberately and thoughtfully thrived under his guidance, while those who rushed or sought shortcuts often stumbled, learning lessons that would last a lifetime. Sonny's role wasn't to punish or dictate. It was to influence quietly and decisively. Routine and discipline remained central to his life. Every morning, he maintained physical and mental exercises that grounded him. He moved through familiar streets and frequented the same spaces, not out of rigidity, but because consistency sharpened awareness. Familiarity provided context. It made subtle changes visible, minor shifts noticeable, and emerging risks apparent. Sonny understood that a sharp mind was sustained by a disciplined body and an organized environment. These routines, seemingly ordinary, were his tools for maintaining clarity, foresight, and resilience. Mentorship, both formal and informal, became a cornerstone of Sonny's influence. Young men came to him seeking insight, guidance, or sometimes reassurance. He taught more through example than instruction, demonstrating the value of patience, observation, and strategic restraint. Assignments were delegated with precision, feedback given subtly, and lessons embedded in real-world scenarios rather than lectures. Sonny emphasized that influence is cultivated over time, not demanded instantly, and that discipline and foresight are far more valuable than charm or bravado. Those who absorbed these lessons understood the quiet power of enduring influence. Sonny also recognized the psychological components of leadership. People respond to calmness, steadiness, and confidence more than to volume or aggression. By maintaining his composure under pressure, he inspired confidence and subtly guided decisions and behavior. Silence, he understood, can be more instructive than words. Pauses in conversation, measured responses, and deliberate timing often achieved what commands or orders could not. He exercised this form of subtle authority continuously, shaping outcomes without overtly intervening. In addition to his personal discipline and mentorship, Sonny valued the structure of systems and processes. He knew that stability cannot rely solely on individual will. It must be embedded in routines, expectations, and relationships. These systems operated quietly, allowing him to maintain control without drawing attention or creating unnecessary friction. When adjustments were required, he made them with precision and discretion, ensuring minimal disruption. In this way, Sonny's influence extended far beyond his immediate presence, leaving a lasting framework that persisted through changes in personnel, circumstances, and environment. Throughout these years, Sonny maintained a profound awareness of change. The city, the people, and the social dynamics around him were constantly evolving. He adapted by observing trends, assessing consequences, and predicting outcomes rather than reacting impulsively. Flexibility, combined with a disciplined foundation, became a hallmark of his strategy. He recognized that rigid adherence to routine without consideration of context could be as dangerous as hasty, unconsidered action. Balance between stability and adaptability was key. Even as his life became more structured, Sonny never lost sight of human nature. He understood motivations, fears, ambitions, and weaknesses. He could anticipate reactions, understand the unspoken agreements between people, and identify when loyalty was genuine or conditional. This insight allowed him to navigate complex social dynamics with ease. He could encourage, correct, or redirect behavior without confrontation, using subtlety, timing, and trust to influence outcomes. It was a quiet, almost invisible power, but it was far more effective than overt dominance. Family and personal relationships continued to provide grounding. Sonny valued these connections not as a source of power, but as a foundation for stability and perspective. Within these spheres, he could relax and reflect while still applying his principles of patience, observation, and subtle guidance. Relationships were nurtured with respect and attentiveness, reinforcing the lessons he applied in broader networks. Personal discipline and integrity extended seamlessly into his private life, creating a coherent philosophy of influence, balance, and responsibility. As Sonny reflected on the accumulation of decades, he understood the cumulative effect of his choices. Influence had never been about immediate recognition or visible action. It was about the subtle shaping of behavior, the cultivation of trust, and the preservation of stability. Decisions made quietly, with care and foresight, had ripples that extended far beyond the immediate moment. Systems and routines he established, principles he lived by, and lessons he imparted became enduring structures. They outlasted fleeting attention, drama, and public spectacle. Sonny's philosophy of influence was deeply rooted in patience. He never rushed decisions, never sought instant gratification, and never relied on force or intimidation. He understood that the most resilient networks and the most loyal allies emerge from careful observation, deliberate action, and consistent behavior over time. Those who tried to shortcut this process often faltered, revealing the value of his approach. Endurance, subtlety, and discretion were his tools, refined through decades of experience and observation. He also understood the value of discretion in handling information. Knowledge, once shared, has consequences. Sonny treated information with the same care he treated decisions, measured, deliberate, and strategic. He never spoke unnecessarily, never revealed more than needed, and never acted impulsively. By controlling the flow of information, he maintained influence while avoiding unnecessary exposure or risk. This principle reinforced trust, encouraged loyalty, and strengthened the systems he had built. In addition to mentorship and discretion, Sonny placed great emphasis on observing patterns. He recognized that human behavior is cyclical, that mistakes often repeat, and that foresight can prevent costly errors. He watched conversations, reactions, and relationships carefully, using insights to guide decisions and influence outcomes. This attentiveness allowed him to anticipate challenges, address potential conflicts, and maintain stability in situations where others might falter. Observation, coupled with patience and strategic restraint, became a cornerstone of his enduring influence. Even in moments of solitude, Sonny's mind remained active. He reflected on lessons learned, analyzed outcomes, and refined strategies. The city moved around him, full of unpredictability, but he navigated it with a sense of calm assurance. Awareness, patience, and consistency allowed him to remain in control without unnecessary exertion. He had learned that influence does not require constant action. It requires measured, deliberate, and strategic presence. Through decades of careful observation, disciplined routines, and strategic mentorship, Sonny Franzese cultivated influence that was quiet, subtle, and enduring. He demonstrated that true power does not need to be visible. It does not need to be announced. It is exercised through patience, observation, and consistent behavior. Those who learned from him internalized the value of restraint, foresight, and endurance. And those who did not often discovered, through experience, the lessons Sonny had imparted silently over a lifetime. Sonny's life, from the outside, might appear unremarkable, an existence of routine, observation, and quiet influence. But the impact of his choices was profound. Systems he reinforced, lessons he imparted, and trust he cultivated continued to operate effectively long after any moment passed. Influence, he understood, is most powerful when it is subtle, pervasive, and enduring. By the end of these decades, Sonny's quiet mastery of patience, observation, and discretion had left an invisible but unshakable legacy. As Sonny Franzese approached the final chapters of his life, he reflected on the accumulation of lessons that had guided him through decades of subtle influence, careful observation, and deliberate action. He recognized that enduring impact was built not on dramatic gestures or loud declarations, but on consistency, restraint, and foresight. The networks he had nurtured, the individuals he had mentored, and the routines he had maintained were all part of a quiet architecture that ensured stability and continuity. His influence, though rarely visible, had shaped outcomes across multiple generations, leaving a legacy of trust, respect, and resilience. Sonny had learned to measure success not by immediate results but by longevity. A decision that produced a quick win could be alluring, but its effects might be fleeting or even destructive. Decisions made with patience, careful assessment, and attention to long-term consequences, however, endured. He had cultivated the ability to discern the subtle difference between short-term gain and long-term stability. That discernment became a defining feature of his leadership. Those who understood this approach thrived. Those who did not often learned it through experience. Mentorship remained central to his influence. Sonny had trained countless individuals, not through overt instruction but through example and subtle guidance. Assignments were given carefully, feedback was provided indirectly, and lessons were embedded within real-world situations. He taught the importance of observation, patience, and strategic action. He emphasized that true influence arises from understanding systems and people, predicting outcomes, and acting with foresight. Those who internalized these lessons carried his philosophy forward, maintaining stability and continuity long after he was gone. Sonny also recognized the importance of perception. People respond not only to actions but to demeanor, tone, and composure. By maintaining calm and measured behavior, he inspired confidence, trust, and cooperation. Silence, he had discovered, could be more instructive than speech, and restraint often commanded more respect than overt action. His presence, even when unobtrusive, shaped the environment, guiding decisions and behavior subtly yet decisively. In his personal life, Sonny continued to value family, routine, and reflection. These elements provided grounding and perspective, ensuring that his professional influence was supported by a stable foundation. Relationships were nurtured with care, loyalty was earned through consistency, and trust was maintained through honesty and discretion. The principles he applied in broader networks were mirrored in his private life, reinforcing a coherent philosophy of discipline, patience, and enduring influence. Sonny had also developed a profound understanding of change and adaptability. The world around him evolved continuously, and he had learned that rigidity could be as dangerous as impulsiveness. By observing patterns, assessing risks, and anticipating consequences, he was able to adapt without compromising his core principles. This balance between stability and flexibility allowed him to navigate complexity effectively, ensuring that his influence remained resilient in the face of change. Even in moments of solitude, Sonny's mind remained engaged. He reflected on patterns, assessed outcomes, and refined strategies. He observed the city around him, noting subtle shifts in behavior, emerging trends, and potential challenges. Awareness, patience, and deliberate action were constants, allowing him to maintain control and shape outcomes without unnecessary effort. Over time, he had cultivated a form of influence that was quiet, persistent, and deeply rooted. As he considered legacy, Sonny realized that the most enduring contributions are often invisible. Systems, principles, and relationships, rather than stories or public recognition, are what sustain influence over time. By reinforcing stability, mentoring others, and modeling disciplined behavior, he had ensured that his philosophy would continue beyond his presence. True power, he understood, is subtle, sustained, and pervasive, shaping outcomes quietly, shaping character, and reinforcing continuity. Sonny also reflected on the value of foresight. Life is full of unexpected turns, and those who act impulsively often face unnecessary consequences. By observing carefully, anticipating developments, and intervening only when necessary, he had maintained stability across multiple spheres. He taught, through example, that influence is most effective when guided by foresight rather than reaction, patience rather than urgency, and subtlety rather than force. These lessons became embedded, not only in his actions but in the practices of those who had learned from him. His philosophy extended beyond immediate influence to encompass sustainability. He understood that relationships, systems, and principles require ongoing attention. Influence is not static. It must be nurtured, reinforced, and adapted over time. Sonny's careful stewardship ensured that the structures he built could withstand the pressures of change and the unpredictability of human behavior. Longevity, consistency, and reliability were the hallmarks of his approach, and they formed the foundation of a quiet yet enduring legacy. Sonny's final years were marked by reflection, mentorship, and measured engagement. He valued the calm of routine, the clarity of observation, and the subtle power of restraint. He had seen countless examples of how impulsiveness, ego, or impatience could undermine influence, and he had avoided these pitfalls through disciplined practice. By maintaining patience, discretion, and foresight, he had cultivated a form of authority that persisted quietly, influencing